Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I'm joined by lifelong songwriter and recording artist, as well as author, Dennis Welch. Dennis experienced something of a musical renaissance in his 60s. We're going to be talking about how he recorded an album in 2000, and 18 years later, he just had a backlog of music, and talk about the miracle that got him back into it. We're going to be talking about his book and what he's up to and going to be up to. So, Dennis, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Curveball, Curtis. I appreciate you having me, man, very much. Thank you.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have always been a word guy. I could read and spell before I started school. And one of the themes that you're going to hear in this conversation, Curtis, is that, at the time that I needed people, the right people to show up in my life, they just have my whole life. And, I have 2 business degrees. I took a few statistics courses, and, and they talk about probabilities in those classes. And I can tell you that the probability of these people showing up every single time exactly when I need them is those probabilities are probably 0, and it makes me not believe in accidents, to be honest with you. And so here's where it started. So before I started school, I could read and spell, and so when they tested me, I was in a little inner city elementary school in Houston, and they tested me, and then they had my mother and I come down to the school and sit with the principal, Ms. McRee, and I sat with my mama on one side of the desk, and Miss McRee, very imposing figure, for a little kid, you can imagine. And so she hands me a book. This is probably a month or 2 before I got in the 1st grade, and I didn't go to kindergarten. So she said, "Dennis, I want you to read this and then tell me what you read." And so I did. I read a page or 2, and then I closed the book and I told her what I read. And she looked at my mother and she said, "You know what? He doesn't need to start in the 1st grade. He needs to start maybe in the 3rd grade, because he can already read at a high level. And we'll have to figure out what to do with him if we don't start him, in another grade." So my mom said, "No, I'd rather him start in the 1st grade. I'd love for you guys to figure out what to do with him." And so on the first day of the 1st grade, I'm in this little classroom, and it's all so foreign, you know how it was. And so it was time for our reading circle. And right when it started, Ms. McRee comes into the room, Curtis, and says, "Dennis Welch, come with me." And so I thought, oh my gosh, I'm already in trouble. I hadn't even got here yet, hardly, And I remember that she held my hand, and we walked down to the school library, and I had never been in a library. And we walked in, and we walked all the way across the library to the windows that looked down on Bowman Road. And she said, "Look, right here are all the books for little kids, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And if you want to, when your reading group meets, quietly excuse yourself and come down here, and you can read any book on these shelves right here." But then she did me this huge favor, man. It was already amazing, right? And so we turn around, she's still holding my hand, and we're standing in the corner of the library and looking out at this huge library. And she said, "And by the way, you can also check out and read anything in this library, anything." And so you know what happened? I fell in love, man. I read all the works of Mark Twain before I got out of elementary school. I read, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and, sports books and all kinds of stuff. And the one book that really touched me the most was Charlotte's Web, because I got real emotional at the end of that. And I thought, wow, you can do this with words. You know what? I got to look into this. And so that's really where I think the seeds were planted, because somebody who didn't follow the rules exactly the way that they're supposed to be done just did me a huge favor. And that's where I think the whole idea of writing and even songwriting might have been, those seeds might have been planted right there. So
Well, I know that you are a lifelong recording artist and songwriter, so tell us how you got into music.
well, my family loved music. Nobody was a musician, but my brothers, my two older brothers, did sing, and they would do some gospel singing, around at the singing, what they call singing conventions. But none of us played any instruments. Well, on my way home from a date, I was 17. Uh, I guess I had the radio off, and I wrote an entire song on the way home. And back then, of course, there weren't phones and easy to record devices. Didn't have that at hand like that. So the next day when I went into work, I sang the song all day. I sold furniture and I was going to college full time. I was working full time. And so I sang the song all day so I could remember it. I was afraid I was going to forget it. And so toward the end of the day, my boss, who always kept his Ovation guitar under his desk, asked me, he said, "What is that song you've been singing all day?" And I said, "Well, it's a song I wrote driving home last night from a date." And he goes, "Well, why don't we play it?" And he took that guitar out from under the desk and he played it and we sang it together. And that was that. I mean, that set the hook for me. And so he said, "Look, that's a really good song." He goes, "That's a real song." And he goes, "It's got verses and a great chorus and all that." And he goes, "Go out and buy a cheap guitar. And if you uh, decide you don't want to play guitar anymore, you can just give it to somebody, but don't spend a lot of money on it. Just go see and learn some chords and see what happens." And so I did exactly that. And I couldn't learn new chord progressions without hearing the story, without hearing the lyrics. I mean, I heard the song basically. And so I started writing, and then eventually I had enough songs to make a record. And through some miraculous events, I got a chance to do my first record. Do you know who Andre Crouch is?
No, who is that?
Yeah, Andre was probably the biggest gospel music star of his day, and uh, even people like Michael Jackson and stuff just revered this guy. They just loved him because he was great, and so we were able to use his touring band on these record my first record, and it was so amazing what these guys could do. So they made that record. It was kind of a gospel record, and I really didn't. After the record came out, it got played on Christian radio and contemporary Christian radio and all that all over the place, which was wonderful. But I was really uncomfortable with that because I really didn't see myself as a gospel singer. I happen to be a believer, but that's not really what I want. I want to write about life and all aspects of life, even the difficult aspects. And so my second album was a rock album called Man of Steel, and it was much more, and it got played on all kinds of radio stations. Christian rock played it, of course, but then also album rock stations played it, and it was all felt very surreal, honestly, driving around Houston and hearing your stuff on the radio. It's just kind of weird. And so we did those two records. We did a record in '95 where we had all these stunning, great musicians who played with me and made the record basically for free. I don't think anybody got paid. It's called Father's Day. And then in 2000, we did the album you're talking about. We did Songs from My Window Seat. And Curtis, I came home and told my wife, I said, "You know what? Uh, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore." because I don't know how to elevate these songs. I'm not a producer, really. I'm not really an arranger, but I know there's somebody out there who can elevate these songs and take them to a different place. And so I'm going to keep writing as if I'm going to find that person, but I'm probably not going to go back in the studio again until I find them. And that was, as you've said, 18 long years of just doing a gig every now and then, working at a day job and that I loved, by the way. But, just thinking maybe this is not going to happen. And of course, then a bolt of lightning. So, did I answer your question?
Yep, that answers my question.
Okay.
So who are some of your musical influences? Who influences you to do what you do?
Well, look, every great songwriter, and I know some great ones, and I've written with with at least one Hall of Fame writer. Um, any writer. I mean, look, people like when I was growing up, it was people like James Taylor and Don McLean, and people like that who were wordsmiths. And and I love that stuff, and I like R&B, and I wish I knew how to write R&B because I think it's so the best of it is very cool. Um, you know, and I'm not a big country fan, and people think that I'm country, but I'm really not. I'm more Americana is what they call it now. Um, and so, you know, uh, people like Mark Knopfler, for example, who was in Dire Straits, he's doing Americana now, and the music that this guy is writing and recording is just ridiculous. And so, I have those influences that are people who are ahead of me, and I think, are better at what they do than I am, I think. And so, I mean, it's not a competition, but you know what I mean? It's people that you look up to and you go, wow, I should do better. I should figure out how to do this better. And so those are some of my influences. I love James Taylor, obviously. Billy Joel is a very complicated songwriter. People don't get it that he's so complicated, and his music. I was a huge Michael Jackson fan. I loved that music. So I don't know. It's kind of a wide range. I like songs that make me feel something, and the artists that make me feel something. If they do, then I'm on board.
Well, you got a chance to work with at least one Hall of Fame songwriter. Tell us
Yes.
who that was and what that experience was like and what you learned from it.
Well, you know what? This was another example. So I met Alan Shamblin, who wrote "I Can't Make You Love Me" for Bonnie Raitt, and he walked on water for Randy Travis, and "The House That Built Me," which was the CMA Song of the Decade. Basically, he co-wrote that with Tom Douglas. I met him years ago, Curtis, when I was in the Austin Songwriter Group. I'd moved to Austin. My wife and I moved to Austin from Houston, and they were having, I had been encouraged by my music attorney who lived here to go to a weekend, like a weekend retreat that the Austin Songwriters Group does. And they bring in all these, A-list songwriters. Well, on Saturday afternoon, so it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, started Friday evening. Well, on Saturday afternoon, Alan Shamblin gives a presentation, and this room was packed with people. You could hardly breathe in this room. There were so many people. And so he told his story about how the circuitous route he took to get to Nashville and to become the writer that he became. And so I met him there, and he asked at the end of his presentation, "Does anybody have any questions?" And I said, "No, I don't." I raised my hand. I said, "I don't have any questions, but I have a couple of comments." I said, "You've confirmed for me something that I already know. And number one is that two things. Number one is that the steps of a righteous man are ordered, because there's no way that this happens for you by accident. So that's one thing. And then two is that God's timing is not my timing. I wish it was. I'm always telling him when to do stuff, but instead of doing it my way, he does it right. Well, when his speaking deal was over, he walked straight through a crowd of people to me and said, "Hey, you know what? I agree with you wholeheartedly." He goes, "That's great for me," but he goes, "What does that mean for you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know what that means." He goes, "Well, let me ask you a question." He goes, "Would you be willing to play me 3 Dennis Welch songs in the morning, out in the hallway outside my hotel room where there's not a crowd?" And I said, "Yes, I'd be honored to do that." And so that's how our friendship started. And eventually I went to Nashville and began to, become friends and all that. Well, anyway, after years of being friends, and I had never asked this guy for anything, Curtis, and I was not going to. I was going to be his friend only because he had a lot of people who were demanding things from him and asking for stuff. And I wasn't going to be one of those. And so, anyway, one week, this is another example of crazy timing. So my wife and I are driving back from Shreveport, Louisiana to see her family. And Alan calls me and he goes, "Hey, how can I help you with your songwriting?" And I said, "Well, uh, listen, I appreciate it, Alan." I said, "But we've talked about this." And I said, I want to be the one friend you have who doesn't really need anything from you." And he goes, "Well, look, I know that." And he goes, "But this is a standing offer. And if you ever need anything, any help, you let me know." Well, get this, Curtis, 1 week later, just 1 week, I send a song of mine that I had already recorded in 2000 called "Worth My Time." I sent that into a little couple in Nashville who were looking for songs for a record. And so I pitched it to them, and they sent me this big dim the lights email back. And it said, "We think this song could be I Can't Make You Love Me because this is a whale of an idea. Okay. But we also think you're not done writing it yet. And so would you be willing to do some more writing on it?" And so what I did is I forwarded that note and the song, my version of the song, to Alan. And I said, "Look, I still don't want anything from you, but I just want you to tell me if these people are crazy, because I'm not tearing this song apart that I've already recorded and written and sung for years if this doesn't make any sense, right?" And so anyway, it was almost a week later, he called me on a Sunday afternoon and he said, "You might want to sit down. This is going to take a while." And it was a life-changing conversation. He began to describe the two people in this song, and like he knew them. It was kind of wild. And so at the end of the conversation, he said, "Listen, they're right. This is a very important song because this song is about silent abuse and just abuse generally. And in your version of the story, the protagonist gets stronger and finally says, 'You know what? I don't think I'm supposed to stay under this kind of duress. I'm gonna go now.'" And he goes, "But there's a better way to say it. And so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna co-write this with you because people will say that you sat in the room because they don't know you. They'll say you sat in the room while I wrote it. And that's not true. This is your song. So I'm going to be your editor." And he said, "I'm going to call you every night at 9 o'clock. And I'm going to find out what kind of progress you made on this song that day." Well, you know what? He wasn't kidding. He called me every night. This Hall of Fame songwriter, what a gift, right? And he would say, "Okay, well, have you thought about this and stuff?" So he was kind of co-writing it with me anyway. So 6 months goes by, and I had written probably 50 last verses, and I just couldn't get one that worked. And so one night we had prayed about it. We cried on the phone one night. I mean, he said, "This song is too important for you to not finish it. We have to finish it." So anyway, so one night I said, "Alan, listen," I said, "Do you know what this last verse is?" And he said, "I probably do." And I said, "Well, why don't you write it and put us out of our misery, and let's and if it's not going to ruin your career to have your name on a song with a No Name Texas songwriter, let's make it a co-write. And so he goes, okay, give me 2 weeks. And Curtis, he leaves the phone. He comes back in 2 minutes, 5 minutes at most. And he calls me back and he goes, what about this? Is it worth this pain and your words that bruise? Should I be the one you love to use? If I have to ask, then I should know that it's worth my time to let you go. Wow. I said, you came up with that in 5 minutes? He goes, well, I've been thinking about it, but he goes, but don't forget that I do this all day, every day. And my sword is a little bit sharper than yours. And so that's where that came from. And so anyway, we've remained great friends. We've pitched it to a few people. He believes it's probably a big song for somebody, but it's going to have to be just the right person because it's not shallow. Let's just put it that way.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay, everybody, it's Michael E. Cullen II.
And I'm Sesame and Carta from the All Too Real 2 podcast. We're passionate about movies, TV, and pretty much all things pop culture.
Dive into the chaos of failed sitcoms, direct-to-video sequels, and the quirky realms of cinema and TV.
Join us every Thursday for your dose of All Too Real 2 entertainment.
We'll guide you through debates like whether Howard the Duck qualifies as a superhero.
Ponder if Larry the Cable Guy could be the new Rock or Schwarzenegger.
Discover if some shows and movies should have stayed in the cutting room.
Ever heard of a sitcom featuring that dictator with the funny mustache? Well, we watched it.
We're dedicated to unraveling the peculiarities of pop culture, sometimes with awesome guests.
So, if you're into the eccentric world of pop culture,
listen and subscribe to All Too Real 2.
Available wherever you find podcasts
and on Age of Radio.
Okay, well, talk about the music renaissance that you're going through in your mid-60s.
Well, thank you for asking. I love this story, not because it happened to me, but because it happened at all. So remember that I did an album in 2000, and as you alluded to in your introduction, I went 18 years without even putting my foot in a recording studio of any kind. And so anyway, in probably 2018 or 19, I came home one night and I sat on the couch with my sweet wife, who I met on a blind date back in 1979. Now, I've never gotten over it, by the way. And I said, I'm a little worried because I'm getting older now. And I said, I'm afraid that I'm going to die and that these songs will be in a drawer somewhere on pieces of paper and they'll just get thrown out because nobody really knows what they're doing, what these songs are about or anything. And so my wife said, well, Susie is her name. Susie said, well, you have that prayer list that you pray through every morning for an hour. Every morning you pray for these people for an hour. You have this giant list of people in this book. And she said, so why don't you put something on there for yourself and see what happens? Well, there was a novel idea, right? So I wrote down something, and I don't know what it was, Curtis. I think it was something like a publishing partner or something like that. And I could find that person, right? And so 3 months later, now this is after 18 years. 3 months later, I'm driving through Nashville, Susie and I are, and we go to dinner with a friend of ours, some friends of ours, Rich and Suzanne Herring. And Rich had been in the Little River Band at that point for 18 years. And he was producing their records. He's a world-class everything, guitar player, bass player, writer. I mean, he's just a marvel. And so again, he had been my friend. And so I'm kind of loath to go to my friends and say, hey, can you help me? Maybe I need to be less proud, right? So anyway, so we're in a big Mexican restaurant, and they had adopted a couple of children, sweet, amazing kids. And so we had this big table, and Rich and I were sitting across from each other. And out of the blue, out of the bluest sky you ever saw, he looks at me and he goes, "So what are you working on, man? Because I know you're always working on something." And I said, "Well, I got this new song called Why Not Me that I wrote on piano, which I hadn't done before. All my songs have been written on the guitar. And Susie thinks it's the best song I've ever written, maybe the most commercial song." And he goes, "Well, what are you going to do with it?" And I said, "What do you mean, what am I going to do with it?" I said, "That's the $1,000,000 question. I don't know what to do with it. I'm going to put it in a drawer with all the other songs." And he goes, "Well, wait a minute." He goes, "Why don't you sing it to me?" And I said, "Right now?" He goes, "Right now. Sing it to me a cappella." And we were in the middle of this big Mexican restaurant, Curtis. And all of a sudden, I thought, you know what? This is an answer to my prayers. So I'm going to do it. So I just sang out, "There's a mountain wide and high. It, reaches halfway to the sky. And in my heart, I know I'm supposed to climb." And I just sang like the first verse and the chorus. Well, that's all I got. He held his hand up at the end of the first chorus and he was emotional. And he goes, "Wow." He goes, "Do you know I'm supposed to, first of all, Susie's right about this song. And second of all, I'm supposed to help you with this. Did you know it?" And I said, "Not till this second." He goes, "Yeah, let me produce a demo on this. Let me produce this song for you." And I said, "Well, do you want some hotshot, Nashville singer to sing on it, or do you want me to do it?" And he goes, "No, I want you to sing on it." And so we do this song, Curtis. And when I got the mix back here, I was sitting right where I'm sitting right now. And I listened to it, and it was immediately the best thing I had ever done. And I cried. I was so overwhelmed by it. And so I thought, man, I hope he does another song with me because this turned out great. And sure enough, he asked me, he said, "What else have you got?" And I said, "Well, I've got a love song about forgiveness called I Can't Remember." It's kind of a Roy Orbison-ish song. He goes, "Let's do that one too." So we do that song, and then he calls me and he goes, "You know what? I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell when something really special is happening, and it's happening right here with you and me." And he goes, "Let's make an album." So we did What Love Makes Us Do. It came out in 2021. And I sent it to NARAS, the people who do the Grammy stuff. And it got on the first Grammy ballot in 5 categories. And then 2 years later, we did If I Live to Be 100, and it also made it onto the Grammy ballot in 5 categories. And then just this week, my new album, Strong, released all the, like they do now, all the streaming services and stuff, and we'll submit it, and it might also, we'll see what happens with it. And then we're leaving tomorrow for 2 months to go do house concerts all across the country, really, the east and sort of northeast part of the country. So all that's, I'm 69 years old now, and the lie that you hear in the culture is that you're too old. Age stops us from doing stuff. I don't believe that for a minute.
Well, speaking of those house concerts, explain to the listeners what house concerts are.
Well, let's say that what part of the country you live in, can I ask?
I'm in Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, originally
Wichita,
from
Kansas.
Louisiana.
Okay. So you've talked to me and said, "Hey, you're coming through Kansas. Are you kidding?" You know what? I'll invite my friends over, and this is how it works. It's very warm. You invite your friends over and say, "I got this really fine songwriter that I like is going to come to my house and do some music for us. Bring a chair and a cooler. And sometimes if the weather's good, we'll have them outside. And sometimes we'll have them in people's living rooms. And they're usually packed to the gills with people. And then I do a show. I do a concert of, my music, and either co-writes with people like Alan Shamlin and others, or my own stuff. And so they're really sweet. events, Curtis, because people, first of all, their friends have invited them, so they're already, they're already okay with you. You're not having to go out there and prove to them that you can do this and all that. And so it's really it started with the folk and Americana writers probably maybe 8 or 10 years ago, maybe longer. But I didn't know about them, and I finally did a house concert 2 years ago, and it was my favorite event. And I've played theaters and I've played clubs and all kinds of stuff, churches, opened for people like Poco and those kind of people, and that was all cool. But these are my favorite events that I've ever done because there's a lot of conversation after it's over. People don't just get in their car and drive off, and it's great stuff.
Okay, and you also are an author, so tell us about the book, your book that you
Well,
were telling me about in the green room.
I wrote I had the privilege of writing some short stories for the Sunday Houston Chronicle many years ago. And one of those articles was called Rich People Shop Here, and it was about my mother. She would take my two older brothers and I to shop for our school clothes. Right before school started, she would take us to the secondhand stores, and we would pull in, and this was the drill. It always happened like this. She would pull in and park, and she would put her hand on whoever's in the front seat, whichever one of us, and say, listen, don't feel bad about shopping in these kind of places because a lot of rich people shop here. And so, my joke was that I said, yeah, Mom, I had to step over a couple of the Rockefellers that passed out in the doorway. And, but you know what? She was unscathed by our criticism. And so the short story was about that. But then I said at the end of the short story that as I got older and I realized that wealth is not necessarily about money, and your how big your bank account is. It's also about doing your calling, having a great life and great friends, a wonderful family. All those things are wealth, in my opinion. And so, if that's true, then my mother was one of the richest people that I'd ever met. And so, my mother still had never told me a lie because rich people really did shop there because she did. And so there was this huge response to it, Curtis, and I was surprised by the interest in my mother. And so I called her up and I said, Mama, listen, I'm going to come over to your house every Saturday for a while with a tape recorder, and I'm going to interview you about a certain part of your life. And you have to tell me the whole story. I know I'm your son and you're protecting me, but you need to tell me everything. And I said, and then I'm going to go home and I'm going to write a book about you. And so the good news is I had somebody in the publishing business, a friend, who heard that I was doing this and said, "Hey, can I be a reader? Can I read your chapters as you write them?" Well, if you've ever written a book, that's very helpful to have an audience out there because you do a lot of this by yourself, and it's hard to know how you're doing. So I said yes, and I started sending her chapters. Well, when the last chapter came to her, she called me and she said, "So what are you going to do with this stuff?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go down to Kinko's and print it off, and then I'm going to give it, to the grandkids and kids and stuff." And she said, "No, no, you can't do that." She said, "You have to. This is an important story." And she said, you have to publish this." And so we published it, and I do some talks that I go out and do a few little talks here and there called Patsy, Paul, and Mary, very about forgiveness and stuff. And then in 2013, I wrote a book about communication called "So What Are You Saying?" And it's based on what I've learned about how to start conversations with people in business and all that. I love all of it. I have another book about success that I've got 50 or 60 pages written in, but I don't know. I haven't gotten back to it in a long time, but I want to. I probably will someday.
Well, besides your house concerts, tell us about any any other upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to be aware of?
My those are basically it. We'll go to Illinois here next week to do a concert there in a little town called Quincy in their park there. Some people I work with, my clients, I told them I wanted to do a concert for their staff, and they said, "Oh, that's a great idea." I said, "Let's just do a little private thing at your facility and all that." And then a couple hours later, they called me back and said, "We got a better idea. Let's invite the whole town." And so I don't know how that's going to go. We'll see. Then we go to Ohio to do 2 shows. Then we go to Nashville and then Atlanta, and we'll be in Georgia for a while. And then we'll go up to Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and West Virginia, and then we'll come back to Texas after that. And so that's leaving very little time because I also have a day job. I'm a book publicist. You write a book, and I get you on TV and radio and stuff. And so I have a lot. I've just been busy, but I'd rather be busy. If you'd asked me in my 30s, Curtis, hey, if you'd said, hey, you know what, your 60s are going to be your most interesting decade, I would have thought you were crazy. But you know what? It can be your most interesting decade, but you have to sort of proactively plan for it to be that as best as you can. You know what I mean? You can't listen to the naysayers that go, no, no, you should go sit in a corner because you're 60. That's just not true.
That's absolutely right. Throw out your contact info so listeners can keep up with everything that you're up to.
My website, I've not done a great job. Let me be honest. I'm going to confess something here. I haven't done a great job of keeping up with my website, my music site. It's DennisWelchMusic.com. Dennis Welch, CHWELCH, Dennis with 2 N's, DennisWelchMusic.com. And you can go there and subscribe, and we will do a once a month only. We don't spam you. We'll send out a little newsletter every month to people to sort of, keep them abreast of what we're doing and any new recording we're doing and touring and all that stuff. And I'm always happy to hear from people, especially if they've heard some of the music and it's moved them in a certain way. It's wonderful to hear that.
We'll close us out with some final thoughts. Anything that I forgot to touch on that you would like to talk about, or any final thoughts you have for the listeners?
Yes, Curtis, if your listeners are out there and they know there is something that they're supposed to do, the best time to do it is now. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, in large part because I've operated like that. It's easy to kill, especially these days, to kill a lot of time in your life. You can be distracted by so many things, television and phones and emails and all that stuff. But make a pact with yourself. If there's something that you think you're supposed to be doing, just get going. And it's interesting because when you decide that, it's very interesting how the resources that you need and the people and the brain power that you don't have maybe in an area, they just start circling around you to help you. But that doesn't happen while you're sitting still. I mean, it only happens when you start taking steps yourself, and it takes a lot of bravery to step out like that. And so I hope your listeners will do that, because the world's a better place when we're doing the thing that we're here for.
Well said. Ladies and gentlemen, please be sure to follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. If Dennis comes to a place near you, check out one of his house concerts and check out his music and his books. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform and visit www.curveball337.com for more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the show. And Dennis, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining me.
Well, it's a blessing, and you're most welcome. It's a privilege, Curtis. Thank you. Okay.
All right. For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.